Okay, so thank you all for coming to the session, Why Blogging Works as a Formative Assessment Tool, with our Head of Academic Development, Amy Barlow. And I'm just going to hand over to Amy now, so enjoy.
That's lovely. Thank you, Stu. Welcome, everybody. Nice to see so many of you here today. I'm going to talk you through how you can use blogging as quite an innovative assessment tool, and talk through a research project that I was involved in around this to show you how it helps student learning. So most of the time, I think because of the numbers, I'm going to be asking you to write in the chat in response to some of the questions that are posed. I think that will make it easier for us. So just bear with me while I share my screen with you. Lovely stuff. Okay. So you should be able to see my slides there. So today we're going to look at why blogging works as formative assessment. So I'd like to start off by asking you if you are familiar with blogging, if it's something that you do yourself. Do you read blogs? Do you know what a blog is? And if you could just put your kind of experiences with blogging into the chat so I can get a feel for where we are as a group to start with. So kind of a variety of experiences coming in there from some people who are reading blogs avidly or writing them. It's a very different style of writing for a blog, and it does depend on kind of what your interests are. But there are many out there around different disciplinary contexts where you can get really good insights from experts in quite an accessible way. And it's nice to see that some of you have got experience as a student as well with that. Okay, so we're gonna talk about blogging and a model of curriculum design that uses that. Really, all of this is about increasing formative feedback for students on their academic writing, and it's also about getting them reading, which is something that obviously we want our students to do. Okay, I'm just going to show my slides again. So this the aim of today. So we're going to look at how blogging is transformational for learning. We're going to look at a model for undergraduate and postgraduate and find some challenges, some solutions to the challenges we can sometimes present. So for those of you who were quite new to blogging, blogs are essentially online journals where there are repeated posts published. Sometimes they are quite strongly subjective, but they can be in a variety of different kind of writing tones. So the main title for today is formative assessment and formative feedback. So I'm just interested to know how you would define formative assessment. There's no right or wrong answer here, it varies massively, but if you can just put in the chat how you would define formative assessment, we can have a look at what the group think about that. It's a great word, yeah, developmental. Assessment for learning, fantastic. Yes, that's our assessment policy. Absolutely, less focus on that numerical mark. Something that links into the summative. Yeah, absolutely, Mariana. So feedback that's kind of helping that development stage. That's fantastic. It is quite a difficult term, and we do have an assessment for learning policy, which basically focuses our assessment design on assessment which is going to give students a chance to practice. Almost is quite a good way to do it. So let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. So defining formative is particularly tricky, and it has this definitional fuzziness, which York says. It's a very useful fine-tuning mechanism for students, and under our tester project, which is our transforming the experience of students through assessment project, we would define formative as something that is required, so it is compulsory for students, and I can talk a little bit about how that works. It doesn't count towards the final grade, and it elicits feedback. That's not to say that's the only way to do formative, but this idea of it being required, I think, is quite important. So the assessment challenge which we used blogging to kind of solve was that when we put these formative learning opportunities into the VLE, whether they might be things like our knowledge check activities, we found that there was quite a poor take-up. And the students tell us through the research in Tester that they don't always see the benefit of formative tasks. There's also a lack of kind of time on task with this, which can sometimes bunch all of the student effort towards the end of the module, or if you've got a mid. So we wanted something that was going to distribute effort across the weeks. Assessment is a very private activity for students, and they don't necessarily share their work with the assessment. Don't how one builds into the next. We wanted to do something that was a bit risky and a bit playful, and that's where the blogs came in. So to continue to build on that, I really like this definition by Earl, which is that when the cook tastes the soup, it's when the guest tastes the soup, that's summative. Structure of asking students to write blogs in regular intervals enables them to stagger their reading around with their writing, and also to kind of engage with each other before they actually get to the final assessment, before they get to that kind of finished product when there's no going back. And the research has told us, as I'm sure many of you are aware, that formative assessment does produce substantial learning gains, but it is very tricky to get this right without ballooning your assessment load and kind of bolting all of these new activities in on top of what you're asking students to do for their summative assessment. So it's difficult to get students to pay attention to work that doesn't count, and that's something that we've seen through the way students kind of vote with their feet in terms of what they attend and what they don't attend. So I mentioned that this blogging model helps to increase reading. Before we get into the details of the model, I was interested in what kind of percentage you think of your reading list that the average student engages with. Do you think they're reading everything? Are they kind of cherry picking? If you could just give an indication in the chat. Okay, we'll start off quite low, Shelley, 0 to 10%. 10%, yeah. 2%, wow, Debbie, gosh. Yeah, cherry picking, 20%. That's quite a good amount. You can always tell, can't you? You can tell when you get those assignments in who's done the reading and who has kind of spent the time to indulge in that. So yeah, we assume they cherry pick, so we perhaps overlist. They do. So we wanted a kind of model that increased engagement with reading. I think we've kind of lost that message with students. They used to say, you read for your degree. really that's a huge part of it, and I think that kind of strategic reading doesn't always give the best benefits. That being said, students are time poor, so we do need to be sympathetic about what is kind of expected of them time-wise. So when we think about writing, what do you think your students find most challenging about academic writing? Do they talk to you about this? Do you have specific content on it? What is the thing that they kind of struggle with to do with this? You can just plonk any thoughts in the chat. Yeah, so sentence structure and the language, yeah. That structure is quite hard to, and the academic English, I think that's a nice kind of phrase, Jim, there, that sort of idea that there is a different sort of way of writing, looking at. Yeah, Mariana, absolutely. So it takes several iterations to kind of polish and get right, and it can't be done necessarily in a short time. Critical writing, yes, absolutely, Richard. That was something that we found as well, this idea of helping to understand what criticality means and what it really looks like. And thinking about the tone, yes, I see what you mean, Charlotte. It's kind of making that move, and unless they are reading extensively, it's hard to kind of pick that up, isn't it? And yeah, I think that's a really good point Jim's made there about prior academic practice. Sort of thinking about our level 4 students transitioning in, they've had quite a big gap already. We just know that level 4 year is going to be quite formative for them in terms of this. So this is, yeah, and absolutely our international students. Oh. So this was our case study. This was our research that we did about blogging. So we had some BA primary education students, and we worked with the course team, and they said to us that the students don't talk in their seminars, that there's a real problem with a silent seminar, and that idea that you're kind of pulling teeth to get any response sometimes. They had a really high summative assessment load, so they had large sort of heavy word count pieces of writing to do in the form of essays. And the course team, as many of you said, weren't actually convinced that they were doing any of the reading or reading in any depth. So we basically changed their assessment model. So we used formative writing on a shared blog platform. So students each had their own space, which was their kind of blog space. So it's essentially an online diary where they will post their pieces of writing. We gave them the task, and again, this was kind of a set up as compulsory, and the whole module was structured around this. So they had to write one 300-word blog post every 2 weeks, and that blog post would have to be linked to a piece of reading from the reading list. So they could choose what it was they were reading. They didn't have to necessarily all focus on the same one, and then they had to post that by the Sunday of the fortnight, and then they had to spend time writing comments on each other's blogs by the following Wednesday, which for this group was when they had their seminar. So it was kind of front loading the writing and the commenting task, and then the students brought all of that with them into their weekly seminar groups. So this is what it did in terms of the structure of the module. So on the left here, we're going from, at the top of this slide, you've got week 1, it's a timeline going down to the bottom, which is week 12 in this case. The before picture on the left shows that they did very little until that final essay, which was approximately 3,000 words. Now we do have midpoint assessments at the university, so your before picture might look very different. You might have a small task and a big task. And then we moved into this model on the right here, which is the after picture. So it had this kind of cyclical shape to the assessment, where the students would post on their blog. They would then feedback on each other's, they would get tutor feedback, discuss that in the seminar, and then that contributed to their final assessment, which was a reflective writing task. So where they kind of pulled together what they had learned from the experience of blogging, from the readings, and that was a smaller piece of reflective writing at the end there. So we had that kind of link coming in there. Sorry about that. Okay, so just very quickly how we captured the research data here. We did some think aloud data collection, which basically meant that we sort of worked with students. It's kind of screencasting. So we sat them in front of a PC with their blog, and we asked them to talk through what they'd been doing and what they thought. And we looked at this in kind of intervals throughout the module. So we were sort of tracking how their confidence in writing and how their reading kind of developed. It was quite quick and easy for us, and it was nice to have that kind of visual element to the data collection. So what we found was that there was an increased confidence in academic writing. So I mentioned that privatisation as being an assessment challenge, and this really moved their writing into the public sphere of the whole group. And we saw through their writing that they really developed quite a strong voice as it developed. They kind of found their tone, which I know some of you mentioned, and they started to see what it looked like. It is worth saying that they were quite uncomfortable about this in the first 3 weeks. There was a feeling of who's going to post first, but they really did get over that, and they became quite proud about the work that they'd done as this moved on. They told us that they understood how to write, and that was because they were seeing each other's writing and commenting, and they were seeing where the tutor had commented, "This is great critical thinking in this blog post, you've done that here." So they were able to kind of understand what good and bad writing was, and having to critique each other a little bit was really, really useful. And they really did sort of grow in confidence. So there's this kind of pedagogy of discomfort. So this feeling that they're quite challenged. They're not necessarily used to writing in a public way, and they were quite scared of rejection in some instances. But it really did grow as the module developed. So I can see there, Frank, that you've asked, how do you judge the quality of the blogs? Is this to do you mean quality as in kind of academic rigor, or do you mean quality as in the sort of the writing? If you can just clarify that for me, I'll be able to have a go at answering for you. We also found that the students internalised the standards of the assessment. So they had this increased awareness of how to write critically, and they also had an understanding of how to close the gap. So if they weren't perhaps where they needed to be with their writing, they seemed to internalise this kind of idea about, this is where I need to get to, and this is kind of what I might need to do to get there as well. This quote just shows that they are engaging in that kind of criticality. And they hear this phrase, and this was at level 6, and we talked about kind of level 6ness with them, which meant that kind of critical evaluation, that questioning. But they didn't really understand what it looked like until they saw other examples of it as well. So that was really useful for us in terms of highlighting good practice. So the way that we set the blogs up were so that the tutors commented and the students also commented on each other's, and there is a requirement for that to happen. The kind of unanimous finding in this particular cohort and in the follow-up research that we did was that the staff input into those comments really mattered. That was driving the engagement. They really valued a staff comment over a student's comment. And they did kind of want consistency in the way that happened. So Obviously, with a large group, it's very time consuming to be commenting and reading in this kind of fortnightly cycle. So we did think about other ways that we could bring in people to kind of engage with the blogs and to comment as well. They had quite low levels of confidence in being able to state an opinion initially, and where we had staff from different modules kind of chipping in and there was some inconsistency, they found that quite demotivating, and that was things like it might be something around referencing or something like that. But as the intervention progressed, we saw that these peer comments really came into their own, and the blogging kind of became quite self-sustaining, which I think suggests that it could be really good for a level 4, especially if you've got a long, thin module, to kind of keep that writing and that reading going throughout the year. So we found that they were really, really engaged in their readings. They were reading kind of throughout the weeks and noticing who'd read what they'd read, and kind of linking up in that way. But obviously, you don't necessarily have to focus your blogging around a reading. You can do, but you could equally break up the curriculum into certain topics or certain kind of areas to kind of focus on. So they did really see the benefit of this for their learning. The technology that we used for the blog, Jim, was it was actually Google for this. I would recommend using Google Sites. I have got some information on tools later. You can also use Blogger. It really depends how public you want to make it. We do have an eFolio system which would do this for a cohort of students, and it's quite locked down and quite private. So eFolio would be the tool for that. It depends how public you want to make it. I'd suggest if you were doing this with final year students, you'd have the benefit that it might be something they would take with them to show an employer, and that is why Google Sites or Blogger are quite good, because they can kind of take that with them. The question there was about how do you judge the academic rigour. I think that's the thing with blogging, is anyone can do it, anyone can have a voice, so there's not necessarily that kind of authentication that you'd get if you were reading a journal. So I think it really is a judgment call about who the individual is, where they've come from, and what experience they're bringing to their opinions there as well. Debbie's asked about using a blog for personal reflection. Absolutely, that's kind of a it's kind of a hybrid blog, I suppose. So that would be more of a sort of learning diary, where you were sort of writing more for yourself than for anybody else. You can bring that personal reflective tone in, as well as linking it to something from the curriculum as well. So you can sort of have a go at doing both there. Just wanted to take a moment to think about digital literacy as well, which is part of this. So we know that we're using all of these new tools and exploring these new things, which are really, really innovative. But there is the kind of the other side of this, which is about teaching our students about their sort of digital identity, about how to communicate and collaborate in online spaces, and how to kind of use information and source information and reference it. So by doing something like introducing a different tool or a more public kind of platform, you are really sort of showing them what is appropriate behaviour and what isn't, and it does provide quite a good forum for talking about appropriate language, sort of the idea of professional etiquette in these spaces. So that is a kind of another benefit of engaging with these digital tools for assessment. So one of the things to be wary of, I think, if you wanted to introduce blogging or to change something that's perhaps a portfolio to be blogging, which is quite straightforward, or to change a large chunk of writing at the end of a module to something a bit more staggered, is that you just really need to think about workload. So the kind of new policy that we have, well, it's not that new now, it's been here for about a year, the assessment for learning policy has brought down the word count. So you should feel able to shift some of that assessment workload into a formative task, so that you've got a smaller summative, something which either brings it all together, or you could, if you wanted to, this is kind of a hybrid example, but you could change your summative to be a portfolio, which is all of these sequence of blog posts just handed in at the end. And then you do a bit more of your feedback as they go through, and the students understand that they get a bit less towards the end. That's completely legitimate as well. Students need some help in how to comment and what's appropriate, and it is really important to link it up with the summative, so they see that how kind of things move together. There wasn't an expectation that the blogs were going to be proofread. It was more kind of, I'm just looking at the questions here in the chat. It was more about letting the tutors have the opportunity to prompt. So maybe to ask questions, or to again, as I say, kind of highlight where there has been that criticality, where the writing got kind of strong, and that kind of sort of made the proofreading side of it a bit sort of irrelevant. So I wouldn't recommend that anything's proofread. Rachel's asking about embedding links to the module and to the blog in Moodle. I would ask the students to set up their own blog. I'd have a session at the start which asks them to set it up and walks them through it. You might have a very kind online course developer who would come in and do that for you. So I would ask them to set it up, to make sure that they've got the right sharing settings, and then to send you, or to share the link to their blog on Moodle. Okay. So I've got some. And if there are any problems with viewing the slides, can you just let me know? So I also wanted to talk a little bit about workload. So the way that you can kind of balance this. I think the important thing, again, as I said, is that you've got your assessment load and it's spread out across the teaching block, or 2 teaching blocks if you're long within. It's not something which is then sort of added on or bolted on. So you can increase the collaboration and the peer processes by having the students do the work. And you can really scaffold when those peer comments have to be done by, and sort of make the effort quite early on to model it for the students. You could see if there are any willing, as I say, PhD students who are on teaching contracts, or your learning support tutors who understand how to kind of support academic writing. They would be great to kind of get involved here. Okay, I think that's a really good point in terms of the forum, Frank. Your point there about blogs perpetuating kind of inaccuracies. I think that's absolutely true. You know, they are a public form of writing. I think for this purpose, the blog is quite closed with the cohort. So you can have it so that only the students can view and the tutors. You can lock down permissions in that way. If it was going to be public, it's a great opportunity to explain to students how kind of volatile the accuracy, or the kind of the academic rigor can be in some of the sources that they're finding. I remember a colleague who in English who used to make a point of bringing up Wikipedia and asking the students to edit it, just to show how kind of unreliable that particular source was. But again, we're thinking about digital literature, about academic kind of factor here. Okay, moving on. So I would like to hear from you about any formative tasks that you do, and how do you link those into your final summative assessment. Is there any good practice that you can share? I know that we're doing this really well in a lot of places already. Are there any good examples from practice that you'd like to share? And we'll just have a few minutes while you can have a look, and please share your examples in the chat. Okay, I haven't got anything coming through. Does that mean that you're not doing it, or does it mean that you're not sure about what to share? Yeah, that's a great example, Debbie. So asking for an initial piece of writing, so you get that opportunity to evaluate it. Yeah, that's good. There is an interesting assessment, which is that the students have to write the essay halfway through the teaching block, and it gets marks. And then the second part of their mark is actually on improving the essay, but they get marks on how they acted on the feedback. So whether they took the feedback into account, that's quite nice for a level 4. Glad to hear that you're interested in it, Charlotte. It's I would the idea of having a kind of practice task. Frank, I can see that. Yeah, and I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there, Jim, in terms of thinking about this as sort of low risk initially, leading to a more sort of weighted final submission. And I think that works particularly well in this model, where you've got those kind of cycles of writing, and the fact that it is that regular does kind of make it feel a bit low risk as it kind of comes through. Fantastic. And we'll move on from that. Thank you for sharing those examples. Just wanted to touch on a postgraduate model for this. I can still see people's ideas coming through there, thinking about splitting the module into 2 parts. I think there was quite a nice example there from, let's have a look, from Paul. A web quest, that sounds very exciting. That sounds lovely. Okay, so that kind of model of sort of smaller things to move through with deadlines and then marking at the end, that sounds great, Paul. Fantastic. Might steal that one. So yeah, so for we also did this for a master's program, so it can work really well for postgraduate. I almost think it worked better for our postgraduate cohort. What we did was we moved the writing, because they're quite time poor academics, we moved the writing into the module. So the first kind of, I think it was about half an hour, it might have even been the first hour. The time, now I can see I've written it there, for them to write before the session. So we had a computer room booked, so people could come there. Really kind of community of writers coming together. The blogs were still individual, so people had that kind of ownership over their digital space, and they posted again fortnightly. So there was that alternate week, kind of write a post. The next week was about reading and commenting. it was a formative task. It was required in that it was built into the module description. Written for posts, so it was quite built in that way. So it was a really nice development for this particular cohort in terms of their professional identity and kind of finding a voice as well. And they did really appreciate that in terms of their kind of confidence. There is, I think, with this a bit of a disagreement perhaps about public versus private. I'd suggest that for undergraduates you always had it private, so you can set a blog up so only somebody with the link can see it, and kind of make sure that it's in a bit of a safe space. So Jim's asked, have you tried blogs written by groups? So do you mean that the group kind of come together to write one piece, or there's kind of the group is set up on a... Yeah, I haven't actually, but that does sound like sounds like a really interesting kind of next step for this. Is that something that anyone's got experience of, that kind of group writing? That sounds quite challenging. Okay, just wait for that to come through in the chat. So the important thing, as I've mentioned, and I think some of you have shared some really great examples, is how to make that link between this formative task and the summative, because the students do focus on assessment. We know that assessment kind of drives their learning. It's what they pay attention to. So if you were doing this in a more of a distance delivery, so kind of what we're looking at for next year, you could just swap out that seminar discussion with an online discussion. So it would kind of perhaps choose a post from the week, and then people focus on kind of talking around that topic. You could have it so that the final assessment is a small kind of digital conference. So the students would choose a blog post that they particularly liked, and turn it into a short kind of presentation that's very easy to do in these kind of WebEx or Google Meet rooms. It's easy to record. And the one that we did with our sort of research case study here was the final assessment. So they very simply had to choose their favourite post, or a good post, or their worst post if they wanted to, and kind of critique it a bit and develop their thinking. That was kind of how that worked. So really important there to make the links. So these are kind of the questions that arise from this. So getting students to value work that doesn't necessarily count. About workload, thinking about how you build community, which is, you know, and also how blogging is here. So thinking about some tools for blogging, and I'm very happy that we've got Tom Langston in the chat, and hopefully you can help me out, Tom. If anyone is used to particular tools, experience with them, they work quite well, please do mention that. As I said, a Google site is a website, but it can be set up into pages, so it's quite easy to add content that way. We have an eFolio system, which enables you to do this in a bit more of a kind of locked down safe environment, and we can provide training on that. And if you wanted to, there is blogger.com as a kind of tool there as well. And we had the question about, you know, should you create it for them? I think actually the students having a tutorial on how to create a blog, looking at the privacy settings and looking at these kind of things is really good training for them, and really good employability skills as well. There is a blog function on Moodle. Tom is recommending Blogger. Yeah. So some things that we had to really think about were the sharing settings. So again, public and private. If it's something that you want the students to take away with them, think about the tool that might enable them to do that and use it as part of perhaps an employability portfolio. And again, a really good opportunity to set some expectations about style and the tone of comments and that kind of etiquette, or netiquette as it's called. So Coral's saying that they've used WordPress. Yep, we used WordPress for the postgraduates, which is quite a nice tool and gives you quite a lot of personalisation as well, doesn't it? I don't have any experience of Weebly. That's a new kind of tool there. Yeah, so if you wanted some more training about this, we can do that for you. Get in touch with Tom either as a course team or a module team, or as individuals. I think it is a really great way to kind of bring in collaboration. And as you saw from the students' comments there, a real opportunity to create some enthusiasm around the literature again, which is never a bad thing. So just before we go on to some more kind of questions, I just wanted to end with these quotes from the students, which kind of really said it all. And we have replicated this in various different modules since. So that was really nice to see. Okay, so as I said, we've got Tom who can organise some training for you if you'd like on this. There is the opportunity to look at your modules for next year. It's worth saying that the deadline for module amendments has passed. There was an extension to this. However, this is kind of a minor change if you're already doing something like a portfolio or an essay. So I think I would advise you to speak to your Associate Dean Academic or your quality rep about what you can and can't do within the scope of your module and the kind of changes there. Debbie has asked if the Moodle blog site is private. It would be, yes, so that would be particularly linked to that kind of module cohort. So that's another option there. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing. And us back into the room. Fantastic. So got some time now to answer any questions for those of you that wish to stay. We've got about 5 minutes. If you want to frantically have a look at your assessments and how you can make this work, you can. Thank you for being here today, and the recordings will be made available. I don't think I'm in the forum tool, Tom. So I think I'm not familiar with how it works in Moodle, to be honest. I've only used these external sites. So is there a possibility to do it with the forum tool in Moodle?
Probably quick to unmute myself.
Yes, thank you. There's somebody there.
Yes. There isn't, to my knowledge, a blog feature directly within Moodle. However, within the forum, I'm just checking it now. Within the forum, you can set it up to be like blog style when you create it. So there's a standard forum displayed in a blog-like format. So that's within the forum tool itself. But there isn't, within the activities and resources within Moodle, there isn't a blog as an option directly. But as Amy said, I even if you're doing it sort of privately, I'd probably go with something like either blogger.com, use a specific Google site, or if they're just practicing co-authoring a document, then obviously Google Drive is a good way of doing that, but that's obviously not a blogging platform. That's just a word processing platform that they can all use. Let me click the link and follow that through, Debbie.
Yeah, that's useful. We're going to learn something today as well.
Yeah, it's always nice to do.
It might be that it's something in Moodle that we don't necessarily have in our particular instance. I must say there's something about using a different type of site, like a bit more and gives a bit more kind of weight to it, I think, than if it was in Moodle. So you'd still link to it, and there is as Mark says, there is perhaps that ability to think more about the visual, to add images, or to brand it a bit for students, which some will want to do. So it's kind of the feeling that they're collaborating and creating a new digital space, which I think is important. Did you have a chance to look at that link, Tom?
I am looking at it as we speak, because I can't see where. Because yeah, in our course list, blogs is not something that we can turn on. It looks like it's a feature that is apparently on by default, but I've just messaged the team to say, is this turned on or off, just to try and find out why or not it would be there.
Okay, that's really useful, thank you. So Yvonne has asked about building trust between students. There was, as I said, in our particular case study, a bit of a reticence to post initially. The way that we got round that was to have some quite open conversations about it. If you want to do something a bit more formally, we have some experience in creating a kind of a learner agreement, which is where the students kind of add to and sign up to a particular kind of code of behaviour, I guess. So they will be respectful of each other. They will make sure they comment in time, in a timely manner. So you could have that discussion with them about kind of how they want to conduct themselves and how they want others to. And sometimes having that quite early on and written down and formalised can help. So hopefully that's useful. I think that sort of almost the activity in itself builds the trust, and it's a case of kind of going through that timeline and that kind of activity, which is why it can be really useful for level 4 as well. Are there any questions in these last? I'm happy for you to get in touch with me after the event today if you wanted to discuss further or see some examples. I had wanted to share some examples with you today, but we didn't have consent, as there are some externals here, so I'd be happy to do that in any other kind of setting. So as I say, it's potentially possible to do this for next year, but you do need to speak to your Associate Dean Academic in terms of your module descriptors. Changes are allowed if they're COVID related, and it might be the assessment that you've laid out, and the fact that you might be staggering that into different chunks is completely viable. So I will leave you there. We've got 10 minutes to swap over into the next sessions.
Sorry, Amy, can I just very quickly, just to show people where it is, if I can share my screen very quickly.
You can.
I found it.
You found it. So we've made a discovery today.
Things I never knew existed.
Thank you, Debbie.
Yeah, so essentially when I'm in, because I thought it would be as part of your course content, and it's not. So if you're in a normal site and you do add an activity or resource, I was looking for it in here and it's not. But if you go to your name and preferences, down the bottom there you have blog preferences, external blogs, or registering an external blog. So that would be like blogger.com or whatever it might be. But you can then go to your blog preferences and change that there. And it looks like it's on. It's just I have no idea how to find it directly again.
Well, should we have a look into that, Tom, and then
I'll find it out and let you know.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. It sounds like it's linked more to a different level of Moodle, so linked to your actual account rather than any specific module. So that's interesting. we'll have a look at that. And as I say, the recording will be put on the same space in the website where you've clicked to join today, and any follow-up resources will be there as well. So thank you for attending. We will finish there, and as I say, do get in touch if there is anything that you would you'd like to follow up on after this session. Take care, enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of your week. Thank you.
Found it now. Sorry, wrong place, but I found it.
Didn't we have that turned on? That's good to know.